Hey everybody, I'm Lon Stroshine, former public company executive turned lifestyle engineer. In 2022, I walked away from my job as a public company executive. I left without a safety net, without another job, without a backlog of clients, or without a resume. But I left anyway. I left because I knew the best days of my life were right in front of me, and they weren't going to be lived where I was standing. Since then, I've launched a best-selling book, coached thousands of elite performers around the world, hosted a top-rated podcast, moved my family across the country, and created a movement that has inspired the change in 1,000 lives. Look, if you're here, it's not an accident or an algorithm. It's you. If you've reached the top of your game and you feel stuck, if you'd trade what you have but don't know what you'd trade it for, then buckle up. This podcast is for you. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. I'm going to see all of you along the Normal 40 Highway. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Normal 40, the podcast. My name is Lon Stroshine. I am the founder of the Normal 40, and I am super excited that you are here. Hey, look, we've got a great show for you today. Today, I get to ramble with my friend, Nicholas Whitaker. Now, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you probably know who Nicholas is. He shows up there a lot. And he does a fantastic job. Nicholas and I share a story. We separated from our companies about the same time. We share some career successes. He worked for companies way bigger than me, companies like Google, but we still share so much in common for our journey to where we are today. And we share a passion for who it is we want to help, which is why this podcast and this material means so much for me to share with you. And I'm super glad that you're here to listen to it. When Nick separated from his job, he knew his calling was to help people. And that's going to come through again and again. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking up the podcast, but his mission is to help human suffering, help alleviate human suffering at scale. Let me say that again. His mission is to help alleviate human suffering at scale. What a beautiful mission. And he's got a process that he's working through to get there. And the most beautiful thing about what he's doing is he's not assuming he can do it alone. He doesn't even want to do it alone. He knows that to get there, he's going to have to collaborate. He's going to have to share, and he's going to have to do a whole bunch of things for free, something I can relate to completely. So everyone, thanks for being here. Thanks for being on the Normal 40 Highway. Take a listen to this podcast and what Nicholas did to get where he's going. Listen to his anxiety, his imposter syndrome, what it feels like to be lonely, and listen to the moment he knew things had to change. All right, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being on the Normal 40 podcast. I'm going to see all of you on the podcast. Yeah, man. Well, look, we're gonna do a podcast. You ready for this? You know we're doing that, right?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right.
Let's do it. Let's get into it.
Here we go, man. So I'm gonna start this podcast out like this. Tell me about what in the hell you're doing now.
That's a great question. What the hell am I doing right now? I'm creating a movement. I mean, in short, I'm creating a movement. You know, my co-founders and I, about a year ago, almost to the day, started putting together what we thought was going to be kind of a new way for us to be able to reach clients, a new way for us to kind of like collaborate. We were doing a lot of the same things. We were both from corporate America. I was at Google. My other co-founder was from LinkedIn. Our third co-founder, who came on a little bit later, she had gone through a variety of different organizations. And we both wanted to kind of help figure out how to make work a better place, essentially changing work from the inside out. And we had started on Slack. We created a small community of about 30 people. Over the course of about 4 or 5 months, that ballooned to 400 people. And then we outgrew Slack and ended up creating a new community on this platform called Circle. Right now, we've got about 670 members total, mostly coaches, consultants, facilitators, subject matter experts, the people that would be going into organizations to do team leadership training or team development training. And the whole idea behind the community was trying to help organizations and leaders operate more consciously, to build self-awareness, to build compassion, to essentially manage and lead the way the current workforce actually needs to be led and managed. And it's been amazing to see how this community has grown and just what we've been able to do over the last year with just the three of us and a handful of volunteers. We're publishing a book coming up here in September. We're publishing this podcast here in August. The book is on self-awareness for leaders. We have a second book that we're starting to publish as well on awareness of others and compassion within the workplace. And they're both collectively built books. So the whole idea behind this community is like, let's do it together, as opposed to us all fighting against one another and trying to zero-sum game approach this whole thing. It's like, how do we all rise up? And it's been fantastic. We have two new parts of the community that are going to be launching pretty soon, one just for leaders, one for employees. And the whole idea is basically connecting the dots between the coaches and consultants and the employees and the leaders that need their services the most. And yeah, we're going to see where all this goes. But that's what I've been up to for like the last
All
year.
right, man. So that brings us up to today, and
Yeah.
that's a pretty good place to kind of set the table. This is current state. Let's go back. Let's go
Yeah.
back to Nick Whitaker and elementary school, and just tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about where you grew up. Look, I don't want
Yeah.
5 minutes on the day you got a triple in Little League, but actually I might want that. But anyway, give us
Yeah.
to grow up. Tell me a little about your family and a little
Yeah.
bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up in the middle of central Pennsylvania in corn country, so not too terribly different from where you grew up, although I think the
Pennsylvania
crops
and
might have
South
been
Dakota,
slightly
dude,
different.
really different. I mean, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, lots of corn, lots of soy, pig farm right next door. Yeah, I grew up kind of out in the country as a bit of a maverick loner, lone wolf, and my nearest neighbor was about 3 miles away. Didn't really have an opportunity to build community or kind of connect with people in meaningful ways in that community. I just felt different most of the time when I was growing up. And I got out of there as soon as I could. I think I moved, I think it was about 17 or 18 when I finally moved out of Pennsylvania. Chased a girl to Baltimore. Don't recommend doing that. Chased another
Baltimore or
girl.
the girl?
Oh,
Okay.
either, really. Well, actually, Baltimore now is beautiful. The late 90s, not so much. Um, Found myself in the rave scene and the party scene for quite a bit, finding myself, and then eventually got my shit together and decided, you know what, I probably should go to school and actually make a life out of my adventures here. Moved up to New York, went to grad school and undergrad, founded my own business. I had a video production company for about a decade, and then lo and behold, got my opportunity to join Google against my better judgment, and blinked and 13 years went by.
All right,
So
hold on. Join
yeah,
Google against my better judgment. Tell
yeah,
me that I can't let that go by. Tell me
yeah.
what's on there.
Well, I was a self-proclaimed anarchist and punk, growing up. I fell really into the punk
Pennsylvania
scene.
farm kid joins the
Yeah,
rave scene. All right, all right.
totally.
So,
Totally. Yeah, I basically went from punk music to rave music, which is a whole other story unto itself. But, just anti-establishment, didn't really believe much in corporations, didn't really believe, I just didn't ever think I would function well in a hierarchical system where I had to like report to people and, play politics. And yeah, I got this opportunity. Somebody asked me if like one of my students, I was teaching undergrad at the time, video production. One of my friends asked me, he's like, "Hey, do you know if one of your students would be interested in doing some marketing videos and training videos for Google?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to. That'd be great." So I basically got my foot in the door and built myself a little fiefdom of work that I was capable of doing. And eventually, 5 years later, after doing temp work for Google, got hired full time and ended up being sent all around the world representing Google for in front of news organizations and journalists worldwide.
all right. So, give me a time frame. Give me what years roughly are we talking about here?
Yeah, 2000 to 2015 would have been the start of that, but my whole
You
tenure
started
was
working with Google in 2000.
2010.
Oh, 2010. Okay, so
Yeah,
10 years.
2010.
Gotcha.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Up until about 2020. Well, what was it 2 years ago? I got laid off in 2023 at the beginning of 2023.
All right, we're gonna go there. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
So you're traveling the world for Google,
Hmm.
uh, and you probably would go back to your home in Pennsylvania and be pretty proud about the fact that you'd say, "Hey, people, look at what this dog is doing."
Yeah. It was such a whirlwind. I actually never ended up going back to Pennsylvania once I left. Went there to visit my folks like once or twice, but it was basically just like a complete separation from everything that I knew. I had moved from Baltimore to DC to New York, kind of climbing up the ranks of like bigger and bigger cities, and just had a fire under my ass. I was like, I wanted more than what that small town could offer me. The town that I grew up in, you basically had the option of working on a farm, working in a factory, working in a warehouse, and joining the military. And I did a couple of those somewhat successfully. But it was like I'm meant for more than this. Like there's more out there for me, and I had this thirst and this hunger to just kind of explore and encounter more of the world. So yeah, that brought me to all these major cities on the East Coast, and then through different career opportunities, ended up landing in this just amazing opportunity to travel the world. And within a period of just a few years, went from somebody who had never been on an airplane to somebody who had traveled to 32 countries, and it just completely rocked my life, completely changed my whole worldview. I encountered burnout for the first time, and then a second time. I had to really evaluate what was important, what I really needed in life very quickly. And that's kind of what's set me up for success today, and really kind of what's kind of put me on the trajectory that I'm on right now.
Okay, so 2015, you're working for Google. You traveled to many tens of countries.
Mm-hmm.
You probably had a badass business card and title,
Mm-hmm.
something you proudly manufactured, and you're pretty happy at the dinner party when somebody'd say, "Hey, Nick, what do you do?" Like,
Yeah.
"Hey, check this shit out.
Yeah.
Check this out." And then what? Then what happened during what I have to assume in your professional career
Mm-hmm.
felt like it was at the height. Tell me what transpired.
Yeah, well, it was a combination of things. I wrote about this a couple days ago on LinkedIn, actually. This post was really kind of talking about how, so for the first few years, I think the shine and the magic of working for a company the size of Google, especially during that period in time, it's kind of the heyday of the big tech industry. A lot of money being thrown around. I had an expense account that was outrageous. I was traveling all over the place, like without ever having to worry about like expenses of any kind. And the nature of the job that I had was essentially taking executives from news organizations around the world out for dinner, out for drinks, building partnerships, working with their news organizations, training their journalists. So it was a very high profile job. And it was a job that like just had an enormous amount of fulfillment. I was able to actually move the needle for folks, help people understand how to use technology in a way that helps them do their job more effectively. And because it was tied to journalism in particular, that was an area that I was very interested in. So it was just ticking all the boxes, the things that really lit me up, the things that I was interested in and passionate about, travel. And then the shine wore off. I think it was somewhere around country 28 or 29. I had been basically on this routine of being on the road for about 3 weeks out of the month. And I would visit 3 or 4 countries at a clip, conference, airplane, taxi, hotel, taxi, conference room, presentation, dinner, rinse and repeat. And I would go to like 2 or 3 countries in a particular trip, and it fried me. I think just being on the road constantly, not really having a connection with family or community, um, constantly being on the move, and then all the while, like I'd be doing all this work, and then I'd go back to the hotel and I'd be on the computer for 3 or 4 hours, like answering emails and like doing all the busy work that's necessary with that kind of a role. And I felt myself starting to unravel. I think
So
the
but hold on,
first,
no, before you go further, I love this. I love right where you're at. It's starting to unravel. The novelty's wearing off.
yeah,
The image on the outside, the name on the business card. When you walk into the room, you've got to act like, holy shit,
oh yeah,
I've got it all together. This is
yeah,
exactly what I wanted. Look at what I get to do. And
yeah.
then you retreat back to your hotel room, or you sit on an airport, or you sit on an airplane, and you think, what in the hell? Tell me, how old were
Mm.
you at the time? What was your age?
I must have been 36,
All right, so you're
37.
still really young.
Yeah.
And did you have family?
No, just my wife at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, no kids,
Still,
just
you,
kids.
you, you still kiss your wife goodbye. I'll
Yeah,
see you in 3 weeks,
yeah,
7 countries later. I'll call you when I'm able.
yeah,
And I'm going to go live the best version of me. All right,
yeah.
cool. So now let's get back to your story where things are, it's the novelty's wearing off.
Hmm.
And tell me what's going on next.
Yeah, well, I started experiencing really debilitating anxiety. It was kind of the first time in my life that I had really experienced it to that degree. I had anxiety about public speaking, or I had stage fright or things like that from time to time. But this was very different. This was something that would only happen when I got back to the hotel. And I think, what you described is a really appropriate description. It was a costume that I was wearing. I put on, it wasn't a suit, but, I put on like, the uniform of like a Googler, it was a polo shirt and like some nice pants and things like that. But it was more than the clothes. It was the personality. It was the persona. It was the confidence, to be in front of a room of 400 journalists talking about Google and like what Google is doing with the news industry. These were not always friendly rooms. I don't know how familiar you are with what was going on in the industry right then, but like basically Google was revolutionizing and changing the entire business model of the news organizations that I was working with. The advertising that they were so dependent on was radically being impacted by some of the products that Google was putting out. So a lot of times I would go into these newsrooms and it was contentious. There was hard questions that I was having to answer, and I was representing this corporation and this multinational organization. Just as a reminder, several years prior, I was an anarchist. I was an
Yeah,
anti-corporate,
I was going to bring
anti-establishment,
that up.
yeah,
You're
individual.
going to
So like
become
here I'm
that
putting,
guy.
yeah, so here I'm putting on this costume, I'm putting on
Literally,
this
that's what it is.
persona. Yeah,
It
yeah,
is,
in order
I'm
to
going to
actually
hand out my
function.
business card. I'm going to hand out
Yeah,
my business card, and this is who I'm going to be for the next hour and 73 minutes.
that's
I
right.
guess 2 hours and 15 minutes. And then when I'm done with that, I'm going to retreat back to the hotel and I'm going to figure out how to deal with this.
Yeah, that's 100% it. And I
So
think
tell
what
me,
was, what I
Go
was
ahead.
noticing was the cognitive dissonance that was occurring. It was like this personality, this version of myself that I was putting on as an act required an enormous amount of energy. By the way, I'm also a bit of an introvert, so like the fact that I'm like in person with people constantly putting on this performance, and then also back in the emails, dealing with the corporateness of that job. It was a different type of persona, that you had to put on. And all of it was stuff that I was learning as I was going along. This was not stuff I hadn't gone to get an MBA, hadn't gone to an Ivy League college of any kind. This was all new for me. So I'm
Yeah.
having to learn on the job. I'm having to adapt quickly. The grind of the job itself was just really challenging. And I just found myself over and over again feeling depleted and was never really able to fill my cup back up again. And this post that I posted a couple of days ago kind of talks about this. Like I woke up on the floor of a hotel room in Japan, pretty convinced I was having a heart attack, and basically sweated through it the entire evening until dawn, grabbed some coffee, went to work again, and came back to the hotel that night. And it was like, I need to change something. Something is deeply wrong here. And it turns out, after a little bit of research and a little bit of digging, it wasn't a heart attack that I was having. It was anxiety attacks. It's panic attacks. And suddenly I was confronted with this kind of phenomenon that was occurring to me that I had to reckon with because I couldn't function the way that I needed to be able to do my job.
So take us to that time in this hotel room in Japan, and you walk into this room, and probably like you had done at that point 60, 70, 80 times, the door slams behind you, and that triggers something else in you.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what anxiety for you felt like, because
Yeah.
I think the people listening, days, weeks, months, maybe a year behind that feeling.
Sure.
They're doing the same travel. They're wearing the same mask.
Mm-hmm.
They've given their last 10, 15, 20 years of their life to something, and they retreat back to the metaphoric hotel room that you're talking about, and they have this feeling.
Yeah.
And if you can talk to me about what that is, what does that feeling really feel like?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I think Lon, it's different for everybody. But for me, what I noticed, it started with a tightness in the chest. It was like this inability to catch my breath is what it first felt like. And of course, the first thing that I go to is like, well, I'm going through Southeast Asia. I'm going through all these different places. The air quality is probably poor. I'm just probably a little out of shape for traveling as much as I'm doing, and like trying my best to do like workouts in the hotel room. And then it started to turn into something a little bit different. It was like this unease and this like restlessness in my body where I just couldn't basically sit still. From there, then it started with the racing thoughts, and it was a whole lot of lack of self-confidence. It was a whole lot of negative self-talk that was coming up. And then it became this kind of panic of like, oh my God, I have to pull myself together again in order to go to yet another boardroom, to yet another presentation, to yet another dinner. And I just didn't feel like I had the confidence anymore that I was needing for so many years in order to do that job effectively. And it just felt like it was kind of like falling through the cracks. It's like I could kind of see the confidence. I could feel the sense of self-assuredness just kind of wither away. And what was left was doubt. And it was this combination of like the physiological, like racing heart, tightness in the chest, unease in the belly. I had all kinds of GI issues, which again, I was attributing to travel. And I was like, oh, it's because like I'm eating weird food and traveling all over the place. So I couldn't keep food down. When I was getting back to the States and doing some medical tests, they're like, oh yeah, like your body is basically not absorbing nutrients. Like every time you eat, half the food that you're eating is just getting passed through you. So, just physically, I was kind of diminishing over time. And then, that coupled with loneliness, I think was one of the bigger issues. Here I'm surrounded by people, I'm in the company of people on an almost daily basis. And yet I felt completely isolated and alone, mainly because I couldn't talk to people about what I was experiencing. I couldn't explain to people like, hey, like I'm struggling here and I might need help. I just didn't have the language for it. I didn't have the understanding. That's what I needed.
You hit on a couple things that I want to dig into. One is, so you'd go through this. And I want to go back to this very specific time in Japan, because I'm sure you can envision it. You can probably envision the room, and we can too. We've all been in a hotel room like that, and go through the feelings, and you go through the self doubt, and you go through the imposter, and you go through the what in the hell is going on, and then what in the hell am I doing,
Mhm.
and am I really going to get up tomorrow and do it again? Do you think that when you went through the most of that night, unable to sleep, mind racing, all the symptoms you described, and when you snap to it the next morning, you put on your polo, you threw the business cards in your pocket, the door slammed behind you, now you're in the hallway walking towards the elevator.
Mhm.
Were you at the top of your game all over again and you put all that behind you?
It's a really interesting question. I think I thought that I was. I think I thought that I was, and I'm pretty sure outwardly a lot of people probably thought that I was too. I mean, I was performing at an incredibly high level. You just by the nature of the job and the nature of the company, there's no option other than to do that. Like you're at a high performing capacity almost always on. And I think I was going through the paces at that point. It was more of like the steps that I knew that I needed to take. I would just go ahead and do the steps. And I've had people tell me like, oh, like you're just an incredibly resilient person. It's like it's not resilience that I was drawing from. It was sheer stubbornness. I think that's really what it was. It was like I can't let this opportunity fall through my fingers. This opportunity is never going to happen again. I have to make this work. There are no other options. And that was essentially the mindset that I had. It was like, put your shoes on, put your clothes on, and get the hell out the door and go do your job. That was it. That was the fuel that I was running off of. So yeah, I don't know that I was at the top of my game internally. It was more like one of those, like, the duck image where the feet are just like flailing underneath the water, but you look like super calm and collected up on top of the water. I think it was like that, and I was putting on a really good show. But at home or getting back to the hotel room when no one was looking, that's when I would start to collapse in on myself. And that was the first indication that I'm not at the top of my game. Something is deeply wrong here, and this is likely not sustainable.
I think you're describing everybody who goes through normal 40, goes through this. You get to this place where, look, you sacrificed, my word, not yours, your video production business to go to work for Google because it was the thing. It was the big thing. And for you at a moment of time, it was an easy trade, most likely. It's like, yeah, I mean, come on, who wouldn't? I would be crazy not to say yes to this. And that's kind of what happens in your 20s and 30s, and even sometimes into your 40s. Like, I'd be crazy not to say yes to this. The next thing, if you're capable and resilient and you show up on time and you do good work, all of those things, like we all are, the next thing finds you. But then you get to this point where you were at in Google on the floor of a hotel room in Japan, and you had to get up the next day and go be you, the you were the day before, the week before, the month before, the year before, because now you've got something to lose. Mm-hmm. Now you've got the income, you got the expense account, you got the title, you got the fact that everybody's amazed at how resilient you are, who you get to talk to, who you're associated with. So if you quit, who does that?
Yeah.
So that leads to the next question. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening to Normal 40, the podcast. I just wanted to let you know that one of the questions I get asked all the time is, okay, what's next? I'm here, I'm listening. Your content is good. The podcasts are great, but what can I really do? And I tell people, I've created a community for you, and I don't advertise it very much, but I'm going to advertise it here. The community is called The Insider. If you go to my website, normal40.com, click on communities, The Insider is $25 a month, and you can cancel after the first month or after the first year or after the first decade. It's a month-to-month conversation. And every day I'm in there and we're communicating in a forum. And every other Thursday we have office hours where I'm in there and the whole community shows up and we support one another through their journey. I want you to check it out. If you use code Insider Access, the first month is on me. Go to normal40.com, check out The Insider, and I'm going to see all of you on the inside. All right. I'll get you back to the podcast. Thanks for being here. I'll see all of you on the next page. And you kind of brought it up. It's like, who in that situation, which describes a hell of a lot of us, who do you talk to? Who did you finally tell that you said, I've got to tell someone, let me tell them? Who was it?
Well, honestly, it was two people. It was first one of the first people who actually convinced me to do the job in the first place. It was one of my friends. We were both kind of artists in the New York art and Burning Man scene. He was one of the ones. I remember we were standing on the Brooklyn Promenade looking at Manhattan, and I was talking about, like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this job. Like, this is so, like, not me. I got this company. Like, I just don't really feel like I want to put all this stuff away. And he's like, no. You have to do this job. You're the only one of us that's gotten this opportunity. You have to go do it. You have to at least try and see if you're capable of it. So he was the one that convinced me to actually get into it. Years later, when I started to have this experience, he was one of the first people that I called. And I was like, man, I just don't think I can hack this anymore. And he's like, no, you can hack it. You can do this. You just need to change your perspective on it. So he was the first person I talked to. The second person was my wife. I told her, I was like, look, I'm unraveling here. I don't think I'm well. And that was one of the first indications, that, hey, maybe I need to go seek some support, and I started looking into, at the time, they had EAP services, employee access or employee assistance programs at work. So I started talking to a therapist, and pretty quickly the therapist was like, "Yeah, you've got anxiety. You've got some stuff you need to work through right here." And it was the beginning of a multi-year long process of unwinding not just the anxiety of that moment and that job, but how that connected with how I grew up, the way I was raised, the way that I relate to leadership and to hierarchy. All of that stuff was intertwined with one another. So it was like this multi-year long process of basically reconceptualizing what it meant to be me and what was important and what I was willing and not willing to actually do.
When you told your wife what you were feeling, was she surprised?
I don't think so. And I think, my wife is very intelligent and very emotionally aware, and I think there was already cracks in our relationship. I think that's where it first started to show up. And this is not uncommon. I talk to a lot of people, a lot of potential clients that I work with. They come to me for like work related issues, but we end up working on their relationships. We end up working in these other areas of their life. The way I like to say is like the way you do one thing is typically the way you do anything. So if you're noticing that there's dysfunction in, say, your relationship, it's like, well, how is that connected to your employment? How is that connected to your relationship with yourself or with the rest of your family? So, that travel that I was doing 3 weeks out of the month, I'd come back. And for the week that we were actually together, it was weird. Like I didn't know how to be with her. I didn't know how to be at home. It felt like home was the hotel. The hotels were actually home. And they all blend together. I don't know if you've done travel like that before, but once you go from hotel to hotel to hotel, you end up with like multiple different hotel key cards in your pocket. You're like, I'm not sure which country I'm in. I don't know which
Yeah, man.
hotel I'm at.
You
I
better
would take
believe I've been
pictures of
there.
the door of the hotel room to make sure that I was like,
Yes.
okay, here's where here's where I'm going, stuff like that. So coming home and feeling that unease, feeling that lack of feeling at home and feeling that disconnect with my wife, like that was, I think, her first indication that something was wrong. Years later, last year when I got laid off, about 6 months after I was laid off, she says to me, she's like, I feel like I finally have my husband back. She's like, you've just been gone for almost a decade, almost our entire relationship and almost our entire marriage. I was not present. And I think that was the first indication for me when I could tell the disconnect between the two of us. And we had such a passionate relationship and such a connected and meaningful relationship when we first met. It was heartbreaking. It was like something has to change here because that is more important to me than whatever I have going on within this company, whatever this business card says that I am.
Yeah. It's we all get really good about figuring out how to be the person we need to be on our business card. But along the way, we don't have a business card for home.
Yeah.
And they tend to be spouse, kids, parents,
Mm-hmm.
fortunate enough to still have parents, siblings, they get neglected. And that seems normal and okay because it's in pursuit of the opportunities that other
Mm-hmm.
people think are fantastic.
Yeah.
The
And I
opportunities
would,
that people don't see you laying on a floor in a foreign country, wondering if you're having a heart attack.
yeah. And I would take that a step farther too. We tend to neglect ourselves, like our true selves, right? You get real good at putting that costume on, and that costume becomes your identity. And then it's somewhere along the way, and it depends on, it's different for everybody, how many years it takes, but at some point, that costume stops fitting correctly. It feels a little tight, it feels a little bit constrictive. And you start to question. If you're lucky, you start to question, like, well, what else? What else is there? And I think for me, it was this gross negligence of my core needs, boundaries and non-negotiables. I had lack of clarity about what my values were, what my core beliefs were, um, all the things that I actually needed to fill my cup and be a whole human. Like I was completely neglecting those because what I was core focused on was getting that paycheck, getting those stock drops, and getting to the next gig. That was my main focus. And I talk to a lot of people that have similar types of experiences, well into their 40s and 50s. And all of a sudden they're confronted with this moment where they have to reckon with what they've been neglecting this whole time. And hopefully they've got the tools to be able to do that. They've got the language to be able to describe that. But the vast majority of folks, I don't think they do. And I think that's where we get into these kind of like, I hate the term, but like what's called a midlife crisis. I don't think it's a midlife crisis at all. I think it's a midlife reckoning. The crisis comes into play when you're not willing to get curious, be intentional, and start to craft what your actual existence could be. That's when it becomes a crisis.
Totally agree, man. So let's move on to um, so we're still at Google. Where are we? 2015?
Yeah,
What
right on
happened?
2015. So I finally got hired full time at Google in 2015. Started in 2010, did temp, contractor, vendor, pretty much every permutation that I could to stay employed at this place. And then finally convinced somebody to hire me full time.
All right. And how long were you in that position?
So that was the tail end of the job that I was just describing. So I was in there for about another 2 years, and then that's essentially when I hung up my spurs, decided to switch roles, went from a world traveling type of a role to a partnerships role based mainly in the United States. And I was still traveling, but I was still just traveling domestically. So it was a lot easier. I got home a lot more often. And this one was more of a partnerships role. So it was more like helping organizations connect the dots between different products and offerings within the company. Way less stress. But it was essentially sales. I was basically slinging cloud technology and ad stack tool technology. Now, mind you, I was doing this at the same time that I was facilitating mindfulness and meditation practice, both at Google and then externally from Google.
Hold on,
And
hold on. Where did that come into play?
yeah, well, so that
You
started
tell
on
me
the
the
hotel
moment you
room
woke up and
floor.
said, "Okay, let's
Yeah,
go."
that started on the hotel room floor in Japan. So like I'm here having a heart attack, assumedly. And what do you do? Well, you look up WebMD and you're like, okay, well, there's like 15 different ways that I could be dying right now. So that's great. And
We're
then
not
the
getting
next
to the
thing,
morning. Let's just give up.
yeah, this is it. We're done. Yeah. So then I flipped over to YouTube and I found a YouTube video by Pema Chodron, who's a meditation practitioner, kind of a luminary in the space. She wrote a really wonderful book called When Things Fall Apart, and it just spoke to me. It was this guided meditation to really kind of allow yourself to become aware of what's actually happening within your experience and gain some sort of acceptance of it. This is what actually got me through that evening, listening to this recording over and over again, just allowing myself to be okay with what was happening and just be in observance of what was happening. And I had had a meditation practice before, but it was one of those things that you only pull out in times of emergency, like break in case of emergency type of a thing. Zen Buddhist meditation. I had picked up Zen in the art of motorcycle maintenance when I was a teenager. Had dabbled around a little bit with some of that, but had never really had it as part of a regular practice. And after I got back from that trip, it became a more of a regular thing. I would tap into these YouTube videos a bit by Pema Chodron that led me to other luminaries in the space like Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach. And then I found this program within Google. It's called the G Pause program. G Pause as in Google pause, as in to take a pause. And it was the meditation and mindfulness community. And I found my people. It was like, oh my gosh, there are other people that are interested in these things too. Most of the conversations that I was having with them, there was a slight awareness that was different than most of the other people that I was talking to at Google. They were seeking something deeper within themselves or deeper within the world around them that was really attractive to me. So I actually got involved in the GPause program, started facilitating mindfulness and meditation for people within that community. And then after a year or two of doing that, I realized that there was like this complete separation. There's these two versions of myself, the version that was selling advertising and technology that basically captured people's attention and distracted people away from what was important for them. And on the other hand, I'm trying to teach people how to be present and how to pay attention. And I think those two started to rub a little bit against one another and became very obvious to me that, like, again, this type of role is not the role that's really going to be able to perpetuate me moving forward in the future.
Okay, so mindfulness was starting to percolate, more than percolate in the background, but it started with a moment of desperation,
Yeah,
and then a fairly immediate positive result from it.
absolutely.
And you took that with you through the next several years at Google. And tell me about how you used that all the way through. I want to know how things end at Google, both from a mindfulness, because I get the feeling, look, I don't know the answers here. I want everybody listening to know that I don't know the answers. I don't have a clue how this ends. I don't have a clue. Other than how you started this, I barely know what it is you're up to, which is fascinating, and we're going to get there. So bridge that for me.
Yeah.
You're moving into mindfulness. You're accepting and permitting yourself to change. You're
Yep.
letting mindfulness in. The corporation who took a bet on you, and you gave some of the best years of your life to, this relationship is changing. Tell me
Mhm.
about how it comes to an end.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think there was a culmination of a few things that were happening. The company I started working at when I started working at Google was 40,000 people. That was the size of the company. The company that I got laid off from in 2023 was something closer to like 150,000 people. So just like the difference in size of the company, it was a completely different company by the time I actually got let go. So circa 2015, 2016 or so, I'm getting more and more involved in the mindfulness community. I'm actually doing trainings outside of the company. I did a bunch of work. There's this one particular type of meditation called insight meditation. It's based out of Spirit Rock in California. You've heard of a lot of these practitioners, probably Tara Brach, Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg, Mark Coleman. Was very much drawn to this type of meditation and mindfulness, mainly because what the technique was really was really just paying attention to what was actually happening in your experience, in your body, in your heart, and in your mind, and gaining some sort of equanimity or some sort of acceptance around that. And that was the core of what I really, really needed, just to accept what was really here, what was really happening, as opposed to shoving it down or painting over it with like a costume that I would go into organizations wearing. It was really getting real about what was true. So, I'm building my mindfulness practice. I'm participating more and more within community. And, I'm a program and a project manager at heart. So I'm starting to volunteer in more of a leadership role within the GPAUSE program. And fast forward a couple of years, the pandemic starts to boil up. I had also at this point decided I'm going to make a pivot in my career. So this is like the third or fourth pivot that I've done at the company. And instead of pursuing journalism and selling ads and selling technology, I was like, I'm going to get back into learning and development. I want to get back into teaching because that's where, I used to light up. And I did a little bit of soul searching. I was like, well, what really lit me up, through all the work that I've done? It's like, oh, it's teaching other people. I want to do more of that. So I made this like left-hand turn into what they call people in development or learning and development at Google in the people development space. It's basically HR, and landed in probably one of the most toxic and unhealthy work environments I had ever been in my entire life. And this is after like 32 some jobs that I've had throughout my entire career. It was the worst environment I had ever been in my life. And this is also happening right around the same time that the pandemic is starting to hit. So I dive back in deeper into mindfulness practice. There's this crisis happening in the world. I have a gift that I can offer. I have the ability to help bring together this community. And what we ended up doing is like at that point, mindfulness community was all these like disparate kind of communities all around the country and all around the world. We basically brought them all together, created a newsletter, created a series of train the trainer programs, scaled that program to about 5 or 6,000 people worldwide over the course of about a year and a half during the pandemic. And then also started hosting things like mental health awareness discussion groups. So if you have people that were suffering and struggling during the pandemic, they had a place to go and share what their experience was. And a lot of it was led from my own story, telling people what it was like to feel like you were having a heart attack in a hotel room 3,000 miles away from home, talking about mental health awareness from the standpoint of a man in America. And they were bringing me around from team to team to talk about my mental health journey, almost like a mascot for mental health within the company. So that coupled with the mindfulness programs that I was helping to scale and this kind of new shift into learning and development, it felt like I had a new lease on life. The team was toxic, but it was like, this is actually meaningful work. This is the kind of work that I really want to be doing in my life. And that's actually what kind of put me on the trajectory for the work I'm doing now. I had started doing all of this work internally at the company years prior. And I had been given budget, I'd been given support. It was all around how to make the workplace a better place to be, a more conscious place to work. And unfortunately, the winds of time changed. AI crept up all of a sudden and it became like this thing. And Google, along with a lot of other tech companies, used that as an excuse to do a workforce reduction. And I got laid off with about 12,000 of my colleagues in that first round of layoffs back in early 2023. And here we are a year and a half later. And I think we're something like 500,000 people have been laid off within the tech industry in the last 3 years. It's an interesting period in time to be alive and to be able to witness how things have changed.
Let's go back to the day of the layoff. Tell me how that day kind of played out for you.
Yeah. Well, let me take you 2 days prior to the layoff. So about 2 days prior, we're in a meeting with our team. Microsoft, I think, had also just announced their layoffs. It might have been Amazon also had announced that they were going to start doing some layoffs. And you could kind of feel in the air, there was an electricity in the air, and it was like something is coming, right? Something's happening. So we're having conversations within this new team that I was supposed to be joining on Monday. So we're talking like Wednesday or Thursday the week before. I was supposed to join this new team and get this new manager that I was going to start reporting to on Monday. And we're asking them like, hey, what's going on? Like, are we at risk here? Like, no, 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 no. We're in a mission critical team. The likelihood of layoffs here are very unlikely. Everything's going to be fine. And over the prior year, I had basically been butting heads with my leadership team. The team, like I had mentioned, is very toxic, very unhealthy. And I've never been really good at keeping my mouth shut. I've never been really good at not sticking up as a nail. And I had been warned when I joined that team by somebody is like, be careful. Like if you talk too loudly, if you try to rock the boat too much, you'll get pushed out. And I'm like, I can't be that bad. And sure enough, like I'm seeing all these things happen. I'm trying to speak up. I'm trying to advocate for better working conditions. And all of a sudden, after 13 years of meeting and exceeding expectations, getting all kinds of accolades, all kinds of awards from different teams for the work that I'm doing, I'm starting getting written up on random violations, just random stuff for stuff that I had been doing for years. And all of a sudden it was an issue. 3 or 4 of those go by. And then finally, it's like, okay, there's something going on here. I think I'm getting managed out. Reached out to HR, they're useless. Filed a complaint against my leaders, useless. And here we are in this meeting, and they're like, "Yeah, no, you're totally fine. There's no risk of anybody here getting laid off." Friday at 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up in a panic. First panic attack I had had in years. Right? No understanding of why I'm up and why I'm awake. Went to the bathroom, had the wherewithal to just like check my LinkedIn messages, and I have this message from my prior boss. He's like, "Are you safe? Are you okay?" What do you mean? And it's like, I'm in Colorado here. So I'm like, maybe there's wildfires or another shooting or something like that happened, pop something up in the news. He's like, check your inbox. So I went to my corporate computer and tried to log in. I can't log in. I can't access anything on my computer. And then I check my personal email, and there's an email from corporate. Essentially, we regret to inform you that your job has been eliminated. We no longer have a role for you. And that was the moment. It was like everything I had been worried about, everything I had been afraid of for all those years, right? All that stubbornness that had kept me propelled forward all those years. I can't let this opportunity slip through my fingers. I can't let this go by the wayside, had come to fruition. That thing I was most afraid of was right there, staring me in the face. And I waited for about an hour and a half until my wife was a little bit more awake. And then I woke her up and I told her, I was like, "Hey, I need to tell you something." And I spent all of the rest of that day essentially like online networking, reaching out to people, connecting with prior colleagues, trying to figure out who was still left at the company and who had been laid off. And then also just trying to put feelers out there for what came next. That was like my default. It was like, go, do, connect. And probably the third or fourth person that I talked to ended up being my current co-founder. Right. So in some ways that impulse was really useful, but if I had it to do over again, Lon, I think, and this is maybe advice that I would give to anybody who's encountering a layoff or some sort of reduction in workforce like this, for God's sakes, take some time, like take some time for yourself. I basically hit go and never stopped going ever since. And I've taken a couple weeks here and there, and I've given myself an opportunity to really settle into like what my experience has been. But I think having a couple of weeks to really just process and feel the feels would have really done me a lot of good.
We are, Nick, you and I are both coaches, and we both coach a very similar demographic. And if there's anything that anybody takes out of this in this time, whether it's change that happens to you or a change you decide to make for yourself, one of the greatest pieces of advice I received when I transitioned that I use now every time is when change finds you, whether on your own terms or somebody else's, take 100 days.
Yeah.
And the default is I can't do that. I can't do that because there is this incredible corporate detox that happens in those 100 days. And I can tell you exactly how they're going to happen. The first 30 days are going to feel a little bit like a vacation. Like, hey, this is great. I'm going to spend time with my kids and family. I'm going to go to the beach. I'm going to go to a game, whatever. And then the next 40 days are sheer panic, chaos, terror, because you wake up one day with anxiety oozing out of you everywhere going, what in the hell am I doing? Who do I think I am? What am I going to do to pay the bills? And all of the doubt just comes crashing on you. And that lasts for 40 days. And all that is corporate anxiety because you've lived the last 30 years of your life delivering for the day, the week, the month. And that's all you know. And now you get into day 39, 40, 41, and you don't have a W-2. You don't have, and your body, your whole person has to go through this detox. But by day 80, you realize the lights still come on in your house. Your spouse is still next to you. Your kids are still happy to see you. You finally get through this detox and you can make decisions and sprinkling in some meditation to your prescription, I think is fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. That's a spot on description. And I think for me, I kind of spread that 100 days off across the entire year because I was just in such go mode. That's been my default for the longest time. It was interesting though, because like I had been hooked up with an offboarding company, when I got let go from Google, and I had got paired up with a coach, and he was slightly older than me, and I'm like dabbling with the idea of what's going to happen next. I was like, I already had this coaching company on the side at Google. I had already had this mindfulness facilitation thing, and I was like, instead of going right back into corporate America, maybe this is the way to go back into entrepreneurialism. I remember talking with this guy and he gave me one piece of excellent advice, one piece of completely useless advice. And the really
Wasn't me,
helpful,
was it?
no, it wasn't you.
Okay.
Yeah. The helpful piece of advice that I got, he was like, look, if you're going to go apply for jobs and like button up your resume and go do all that stuff, like go do that. Right. But if you're going to build a business, if you're going to build a coaching company and do something entrepreneurial, go do that. If you're straddling across both of those things, neither one of those is going to lift off and you're just going to be torn. And I was like, God, that's actually really, really good advice. So interestingly enough, I never updated my resume, never applied to a single job other than a few handful of ones that I had to do in order to get unemployment. And then started building this business and just went all in on that. The other piece of advice that he gave me that was kind of useless was actually a piece of advice I would kind of share back down to other coaches. I was asking him, I was like, well, how do you get your business? He's like, oh, I get it all through referrals. I'm like, okay, great. Well, how do you get your referrals? He's like, oh, I built a business up over the last like 20 years. So like people just come to me. I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't help me out very much now. And I'm like, well, what about social media? Like, what about like things like that? He's like, oh, no, I don't share any of my stuff online. I don't want people like to really know what my process is. And just fundamentally, I disagreed with that. I just from a core ethos perspective, I was like, I just don't believe in that approach. And that was what the first kind of light bulb moment was for me. It was like, I could go do this. I could go be a coach and I could be a very successful coach, or I could try to bring as many people along with me as I possibly can. And that was that first conversation that I had with my co-founder. I was like, hey, we're both doing similar types of work. What would it look like if we did this together? And then we had 30 people, and then we had a couple hundred people, and now we have several hundred people all working towards this goal, this movement to change work from the inside out. And I'm glad I got that terrible piece of advice from him, because it was what propelled me into this new direction and in this new kind of approach to like, look, we're going to be stronger together. If we're going to try to do something bold, well, let's try to do it in community.
That makes perfect sense to me why you would view that as lousy advice. And it goes all the way back to the kid you were in Pennsylvania, the kid who was on the rave scene, the kid who was anti-establishment, because that's an establishment play to hold,
Yeah.
to hold the IP. That's all I have.
Yeah.
Come to me for this IP. And you're naturally hardwired to be better together.
Yeah.
And if it's good for me, it's good for us. And let's figure out how to do this, man. I think it resonates perfectly for me why that was bad advice for you. Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the Normal 40 podcast. My name is Lon Stroshine, founder of the Normal 40, and I'm super glad you're here. Hey, really quick, by now you know it's my mission to inspire the change in 1,000 lives. And you know that this podcast is just one of the ways I'm doing it. You can also go to my website, normal40.com, and sign up for my free newsletter that comes directly to your inbox. Now, it's not really a newsletter in the sense that you're going to find much news in it. It's just letters from me to you, man, right where you are on your journey. The topics are going to vary from week to week, and I might have a guest article from time to time, but the intent of the Rambler is to meet you right where you're at, and I hope you sign up. You can also sign up for the 14 questions that changed my life. These are questions you can answer for yourself, but these are the questions I wrestled with when I was right where you are. Just a couple other things really quick. A few weeks ago, I launched my book called The Trade, and The Trade within minutes was an Amazon #1 bestseller in multiple categories, and it remains there to this day. I would love it if you'd go buy the book, not because you're going to get something out of me when you read it. It's because the book is going to get something out of you when you read it. Lastly, I've got a closed group off LinkedIn that I call the Insider, and this is where I hang out. I hang out a few times a month in cohorts and in one-on-one calls, and you can come in there and you can join the Insider and you can see for yourself that you are not alone. I would love to see you in there. Look, last thing I'll say is if you're here and this podcast is resonating with you and you can feel something burbling up, I want you to know that you are ready. You are here not because an algorithm. You are here because you are ready, and I want to help you see you through to the other side. Everyone, thanks for being here. Check out the other episodes, and I'm going to see you a little further down the road. So talk a little bit about tell me a little bit more about what you are doing now and how people can get involved with you. Because I got to say, look, your and my story is so similar from a timing standpoint, from a philosophy standpoint. I just love to listen to you talk because it feels like it's a mirror, and it's refreshing, and it's fun and good and helpful. Because the people who listen to this podcast are at this place where they're searching for something and they oftentimes don't even know what in the hell it is.
Yeah.
And they're looking for answers and they don't know who to ask, who to talk to.
That's right.
So tell me a little bit more about what you're doing now, what you offer, and how people can kind of just explore. I tell them that's the first step in my coaching. What are you going to explore? What are you going to explore? You got to accept, accept where you're at, permit yourself to do something, and then what are you going to do? What are you going to explore? It's free.
Mhm.
Tell me what you got going on, man.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love that framework. And yeah, I mean, Lon, listen, like you were an inspiration, honestly, a lot of the way, because you're a handful of steps ahead of me. I think we both kind of like popped onto the scene roughly around the same time. And it was like, my God, there's actually a handful of other people that are doing this type of work. Matt Doan, I think, was another one. And it was like, gosh, like there's other people doing this. Like this is possible, right? This isn't totally like a pipe dream. So, I think folks like yourself really encouraged me to keep going in this direction, and all of the feedback that I was getting from folks, and every time I told people about what we were actually trying to build here, the excitement, and like the question that usually came up after I told people was like, how do I get involved? How do I help? And that's exactly the type of energy that we're trying to encourage within the Changing Work Collective. And there's two things that I'm doing. Like the first thing is I'm helping people on an individual one-on-one coaching basis traverse these types of moments in time. I've gone through about a dozen different permutations of what I call myself. I call myself a well-being coach. I call myself a performance coach, a transition coach, all these things. I've just boiled it down to just like a well-being and performance coach, or what do I call myself? A well-being coach for high performers is what I'm calling myself right now.
Man,
And
I just got to laugh because I struggle with the same thing.
it's impossible.
It's
It's an
like, what do you
impossible
call
task.
yourself? I'm just a dude from the internet, man.
That's
I've
that's
some of the
basically
stuff
it.
you want to do. So let me
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and honestly, like thank God for analytics, because I was able to search for like what keywords people are using to actually look me up. Most of the time, people are just looking for well-being and coach. So I just kept it there, kept it simple. And then to do that at scale, like one of my core philosophies and core approaches is like I want to help alleviate human suffering at scale. That's my main mission, top line mission, help alleviate human suffering at scale. How do you do that? Well, you can't do that necessarily by yourself. Doing that in community is the best way, as far as I'm concerned. So we built this community. Like I said, we started with coaches and consultants and facilitators. And the idea is really to take the cream of the crop, the best modalities, the best practitioners, the people that are actually moving the needle for leaders to help them be more conscious, to help them be better leaders, the types of leaders we need today. Working with those folks to figure out like what actually does work. So that's where we started. Now we're opening up two new areas within the community. One for leaders. So if you yourself are a leader that's interested in being more conscious and compassionate and helping lead and coach your employees through greatness, well, now you have a community that you can join of other people where you can ask those difficult questions. You can be safe knowing that you can ask any question that you need and get the kind of support that you need. And eventually we'll start to highlight these leaders and basically put them up on a pedestal and say like, hey, if you're interested as an employee to work for a conscious leader, here's what that looks like. We're also opening up another area of the community specifically for employees. So people that are experiencing the kinds of things that I've experienced, toxic leadership, toxic teams, unhealthy work environments, people that have maybe hit their midlife, awakening or midlife reckoning and decided that they needed something different, but they don't know what that is yet. Well, they too need a place to go talk and engage with other people and share their stories and feel not alone in that process. So we're creating a community for them so they can connect with one another. Eventually, we'll have a job board for those folks. So if people want to find themselves in healthier teams or more conscious companies, they'll have that option. And like I said earlier, like we've got a couple other things we're putting out there. We have a podcast that we're launching. We've got two different books, one that's almost done and we're going to be published here in September, another one coming down the pike pretty soon. And then we have an ongoing list of events, both events that we're publishing and producing, but then also user-led or member-led events on a daily basis. So if you join the collective, you can visit us at changingwork.org. You can use the coupon code CWCNIC. That's CWC for Nick for me. And that'll get you a couple of months of free access to the community. And it's a really beautiful place that we've created. We have monthly gatherings where we have the entire community come together and share and engage with one another and connect. We have on a weekly basis things like meditation and mindfulness sessions. We have workshops to help you build your brand or build your business, to connect with other leaders, to learn conscious business practices. And pretty soon here, within the next 4 or 5 weeks, we're actually incorporating as a nonprofit so that we can get fiscal sponsorship, we can get funding, we can take donations, so that we can do that mission to help alleviate human suffering at scale. And we bring more people under the tent. And we're just getting started, Lon. The plans are in the future to actually then start working with students and educators to help the next generation of leaders and connect them between all the rest of the folks within the community so that people don't have to feel alone. They don't have to feel like they're having a heart attack in a hotel room 3,000 miles away from home. They know who to call. They know who to connect with, and they have the resources they need to be at their best for real.
Dude, I love it. We'll put this information in the show notes so people can come back and and find what you guys are doing. And you and I should probably talk offline in ways that I can be helpful to you. I just think that there's a lot of there might be some value I can offer because I
Yeah,
just believe in what you guys are doing. I just
I
do.
appreciate
I
that.
love it. One last question. One of the things I've stumbled upon over the course of the last 2 years of my journey is that all of us have what I call the second resume. It's
Mm.
this thing that's under the surface. It's a thing that you don't find on LinkedIn. You don't find it on the internet. You try to hide it. You're in some cases that usually the people inside your house know about it
Mhm.
because they lived it with you. But it's the stuff that you don't like to talk about. But it's the thing or things that built you,
Mhm.
made you who you are, that gave you the resilience. I'd love to know for you, what is that second resume thing that we're not going to find on LinkedIn that built you?
I love that question. Well, it's a little interesting one for me because like it is all over LinkedIn. Like I share it all the time, and I think for me, the resume on paper or that LinkedIn list of jobs never really felt like me. Those were the things that I was doing. That was the vocation, the things I got to pay for the bills, right? Everything else, the mindfulness practice, the mental health struggles that I've had over the years, the vulnerability, the fear, like those are the things that I talk about regularly on LinkedIn. So if you've followed me for any length of time, like you've heard most of my story. I've talked about all of this stuff in different degrees. That's the stuff that I think is most important to share, especially as men in America. We're not really raised to talk about our feelings. We're really not raised to think that we need anything, right? It's like, oh, I'm self-reliant. I can do this all myself. So I think for me, it's a public service. And it's also part of my healing process to talk about these things and to kind of put that second resume out there as publicly as possible. And man, the DMs that I get, I know you get these too. I've seen you post the screenshots of some of these conversations that you have with folks. I get these things too. Every time I put a post out there talking about the struggle that I have and how I still struggle to this day to maintain a healthy balance and to help keep my mental health and my emotional health regulated. Every time I post about that, I get a flood of DMs in my inbox, people saying, "Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much for talking about these things. I felt so alone in my experience, and what you just described is exactly what I'm going through." So that's the resume that I put out there constantly. Luckily enough, it's also a really beautiful way to attract people to what we're doing. So what I've learned, and this is probably a lesson for most people, is the more vulnerable and the more open and the more raw that I am about my experience, the more it attracts people. And I think that for me is really the goal. It's not out there fishing for leads. It's not out there like pursuing people. It's attracting people like a flame. Come to us. Come share your story. You're not alone. You have options. You have support. We're waiting for you.
Nick Whitaker, dude, it has been such a joy to see you just become something so pure on LinkedIn and be you. And then now to have a chance to chat with you, bring it to the Normal 40 podcast, man. It's been a joy. And I just have a feeling that you and I aren't done talking.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate that one. Yeah. In fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you're going to be on my podcast on the 28th of August. So we finally got that nailed down. So we'll definitely keep talking there. I can't wait to hear more about your story and what got you here. And just a shout out to everybody who's following along and listening to your podcast and the work that we're doing. I think there's a lot of lurkers out there. There's a lot of people that are, and I get this all the time, and you probably do too. Hey, I've listened to you or I've followed you for 4 or 5 months, and this one post finally got me to reach out. I'm not comfortable sharing it on LinkedIn, but here in the DMs, I'll tell you about what my experience is. This is what I live for, right? It's to light that lighthouse for people, to attract people to what we're doing, and to let them know they're not alone. So I just want to thank you for all the work that you're doing out there in the world. And again, thank you for being an inspiration for me. I think coming across your work and coming across the work of other people that are doing similar types of things out there, it was an inspiration. It was like, okay, look, this is totally possible. If Lon's doing it, there's no reason why I can't.
If I can do it, anybody can do it, boss. I think that's the message here.
That's it.
All right,
That's
man.
it.
Thanks a bunch. Thanks for being here. And I'm going to see you on the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, man.
Hey, thanks to my friend Nick. Hey, man, it's super cool that you spent so much time with me and shared so much of your story with us. It's not always easy talking about the second resume, the things in our lives that change us, the stuff that shows up and actually, literally in your case, throws you to the floor with anxiety and concern and frustration and all of the emotions that we feel when we know our work there is done. So thanks for sharing your story. It's going to resonate with a whole bunch of people. And thanks for helping so many people understand what they need to do next, to accept where they're at, permit them to take an action, and then to take an action. It's so helpful. My name's Lance Stroshine. If there's ever anything I can do for you, you know where to find me. You can reach out to me or you can reach out to Nick. We're the types of dudes who are going to show up for you. I also want to say thanks to my dear friend, Damien Boudreau, who did this incredible theme music for me. It's the best on the entire podcast universe, dude. And I appreciate you. Everyone, thanks for being here. Thanks for being on the Normal 40 podcast. Excuse me. And I'm going to look forward to seeing all of you on the next page.